Have you ever wondered what would happen if a 200-year-old foreign policy was suddenly dusted off and, well, weaponized for the 21st century? Because in 2026, that's pretty much exactly what happened. Today, we're diving into the Donroe Doctrine, a move that didn't just grab headlines, it set a brand new, and some would say dangerous, precedent for the entire world.
So, how on earth did we get here? To really get it, we have to start with a single dramatic event, the one that sent absolute shockwaves across the globe and brought this dusty old doctrine roaring back to life.
Picture this. It's January 2026, and U.S. military forces capture the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro. Now, the justification given by President Donald Trump, it wasn't a UN resolution, it wasn't some big international coalition. Nope. Instead, the White House reached way back, almost 200 years, to pull out a policy most people had forgotten about, the Monroe Doctrine.
But let's be clear, this was a radical, super aggressive reinterpretation for our modern times. To really understand what happened and why its ripple effects are being watched so closely in places like Beijing and New Delhi, we've got to go back to the beginning.
You see, the Monroe Doctrine was never really set in stone. It started out in 1823 as basically a defensive shield, a "Hey Europe, stay out of the Americas" kind of message. But by 1904, it had already morphed into a tool to justify U.S. intervention. Then fast forward to 1962, and it was used during the Cuban Missile Crisis to push back against the Soviets. So this long history of, let's call it flexibility, really set the stage for its most dramatic reboot yet in 2026.
And this slide really gets to the heart of the change. The original Monroe Doctrine was a shield. It was about mutual non-interference. The Donroe Doctrine, though, that's a sword. It's not just about keeping other powers out. It's about asserting total American dominance, militarily, politically, and economically within its own backyard.
So what are the actual rules of this new doctrine? Well, this reinterpretation basically rests on four pretty aggressive new pillars.
These four pillars, when you put them together, effectively create a whole new set of rules for the road. The U.S. can act alone, no allies needed. It can actively try to remove governments it doesn't like, and this is a big one. It treats economic competition from rivals like China not as just business, but as a full-blown national security threat. It's a framework that pretty much puts American interests above established international law.
And that brings us right back to that economic pillar. The operation in Venezuela wasn't just some abstract political move. We're talking about a country that holds nearly 17% of the world's proven oil reserves. That's a huge number, and securing access to those resources was framed as a core strategic must-have for the United States.
And don't think for a second that this logic is just about Latin America. We see the exact same thinking being applied up in the Arctic, with a renewed push to acquire Greenland. The goal is crystal clear. Get control of its valuable mineral deposits and cut down on economic dependence on rivals, especially China.
You know, the name for this whole shift didn't come from some academic paper or a critic. In a press conference, President Trump himself kind of wryly gave the policy its new name. And that casual comment really highlighted a very serious, very intentional pivot in American foreign policy.
Now, an action this big doesn't just happen in a bubble. It sets a powerful precedent. It creates a ripple effect that spreads far, far beyond the Americas.
Critics argued that the Donroe Doctrine is a direct attack on this system. You know, this rules-based order is basically the entire architecture set up after World War II to stop a return to a world where powerful nations could just take whatever they wanted. It all hinges on respecting sovereignty, the very principle this new doctrine seems to reject.
The real danger here is that it basically provides a blueprint for other powers, right? Because how can the U.S. condemn another country for doing the exact same thing it just did? You could see a country like China, for instance, applying the same logic, claiming Taiwan is its exclusive sphere of influence and rejecting all outside interference to justify a unilateral military move.
And this brings us halfway across the world to India. You might be asking, okay, why does a shift in U.S. policy in the Americas matter so much over there? Well, because while the impacts are indirect, they are also incredibly profound.
For India, the concerns are coming from all sides. First, you have the erosion of global norms. India is a big supporter of a multipolar world that's governed by law, not just the mood of a single superpower. Second, instability in West Asia. U.S. actions can easily spark proxy wars in a region that is the absolute lifeblood of India's energy supply. Third, the potential for terror to grow. Power vacuums created by these kinds of interventions can become breeding grounds for extremist groups, a direct threat right on India's doorstep. And finally, it just pours gasoline on the U.S.-China rivalry, forcing India into a really tricky balancing act between its partners.
The significance of this doctrine for India is so clear.
In fact, that it's now a key topic in the country's super prestigious civil service exams, the UPSC. What that means is India's future top diplomats and policymakers are literally being trained to navigate a world where the old rules of global power might not apply anymore.
And all of this leaves us with one big, provocative final question. The shift from Monroe to Donroe isn't just about the Americas. It signals a world where established rules are being rewritten by sheer power. So when one superpower decides to change the whole game, the only question left is, who's going to follow their lead?